Welcome into the horse race. I am your host, Daniel Vaughn. I'm the senior columnist at the Conservative Institute, and we're here to cover everything related to the 2024 elections tonight, all the polling, everything that you've likely seen in the news related to Joe Biden, and just about everything that's the fallout that's happened since the debates that happened last week. I had an immediate reaction after those debates. I've since written columns about what happened then. And now we're here talking about tonight, what's leading off the show tonight with the media's attempt to knock Joe Biden out of this race. It is a knives out affair. I'm sure you've no doubt seen things like the New York Times editorial board where they've released their opinion that Joe Biden should step down. That is, of course, one of the leading opinions out there. Since then, we've seen Joe Biden try to right the ship and get people back on board with him. And now what you're seeing is return from the media, returning fire. Over the weekend, there were a lot of reports of how Joe Biden was meeting at Camp David with his family, talking over what to do. And so now what we're doing is we're seeing a shift out of from the family was doing, and you saw a lot of accusations from Joe Biden's family against the media, against certain staffers, that sort of thing. And now what you're seeing is the response to that. So now the press is firing right back. So what has happened tonight, as I'm recording, you had Joe Biden come out and give a speech about the Supreme Court's opinion related to immunity and Donald Trump's and his many legal cases. Well, Joe Biden gave a short speech on that. It was sort of last minute for the White House. And then after he gave that speech, CNN proceeded to basically drop a nuke on Joe Biden. They rolled out Carl Bernstein to talk about what he knew about Joe Biden. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a clip of that, and then we're going to walk through some of it together here because it was truly, truly wild. I did not expect CNN to go all knives out for him. So the segment ran on Anderson Cooper's 360 show, and he was talking to Carl Bernstein about what happened. And so we're just going to play this clip here.
Another data point for anyone trying to assess his physical and mental state from a distance. Tonight, though, after a weekend of calls for him to bow out of the race and sharp rebuttals from his supporters, we have some new reporting from Carl Bernstein, CNN political analyst and author and legendary journalist. So, Carl, according to the people you've been talking to, what are you hearing?
Well, these are people, several of them, who are very close to President Biden, who love him, have supported him, have been among them are some people who have raised a lot of money for him. And they are adamant that what we saw the other night, the Joe Biden we saw, is not a one-off, that there have been 15, 20 occasions in the last year and a half when the president has appeared somewhat as he did in that horror show.
Let's stop there for a moment. I want to kind of put a fine point on what's happening here. So you have CNN. Remember, Joe Biden has just talked, and he's used a prompter similar to how he's done at some of these rallies. And now CNN is coming back and basically saying that was fake. The real thing is what you saw during the debate. Now, if you're most Americans, you think this anyway. But what is interesting here is that you're seeing what the assumption is in the media shift. Now they're going after saying, before you would have heard segments like, well, Joe Biden is sharp behind closed doors. He's always active and that sort of thing. And now you're seeing the polar opposite. The debate has changed the frame of reference that the press has towards Joe Biden. And so Carl Bernstein here is talking about 15 to 20 instances. That's a lot. The debate was one major instance, but now we have 15 to 20. Well, this is a major shift in reference. So we're going to go back here and we're going to let him continue describing, what his sources are saying. And I want to note he's talking to people close to Joe Biden. One of his sources, I think we can kind of figure out from what he's saying, and we'll stop there and I'll point that out to you.
That we witness. And what's so significant is the people that this is coming from, and also how many people around the president are aware of such incidents, including some reporters, incidentally, who have witnessed some of them. But here we see tonight, as these people say, President Biden at his absolute best, and yet these people who have supported him, loved him, campaigned for him, see him often, say that in the last 6 months particularly, there has been a marked incidence of cognitive decline and physical infirmity.
What I wonder about...
So again, we're going to pause right there. So what I want you to note about what he's saying is who knows about this. It's one thing to say that that White House staffers know about this, which is what he's hinting at here. He's also saying that reporters and journalists in the White House know about this. And we've seen some reports come out. Notably, last year, the New York Times was kind of reporting about possible health and age issues related to Biden, but that kind of faded. This year, the Wall Street Journal dropped a very large report that the White House attacked heavily, basically pointing out this very thing. And if anyone brought this up at any point in the last 6 to 12 months, in particular, the White House attacked them full throttle, and the press was carrying the water. Basically, you would get a lot of people fact checking it, saying, "Oh, these are all fake stories," or you get things like phrases like "cheap fake." We're not in cheap fake territory. This is a journalist here, part of part of the Nixon era here, describing to you that things are not being reported on and that journalists know more than what they do. And in particular, you have people saying that White House staffers and journalists know more than they're saying. So we're going to go back into the interview here and let him keep going.
Is the people who were, working with him at Camp David, allegedly in this intensive debate prep, if there were concerns there about this, and I don't know if you have got any word about that, but how anybody involved in that debate prep, I mean, didn't anybody see something?
Well, the debate prep was supervised by Ron Klain, who has been with President Biden for many years. And people I've talked to have all been to Ron Klain in the last year to say, we have a problem. We have a problem such as we saw the other night, that there have been numerous instances where the president has lost his train of thought, can't pick it up again. There was a fundraiser at which he started at the podium, and then he became very stiff, according to the people there, as if it were almost a kind of rigor mortis.
This was reported allegedly in June of 2020.
This was June of, this was a year ago, almost exactly, at the old Four Seasons restaurant on Park Avenue. And he became very stiff, and a chair had to be brought for him to do the latter part of the event. I think that
rigor mortis is a very, very strong word because you're using death phrases at that stage in reference to the president. So again, this is strong language. And the other thing I would point out here too, he references Ron Klain. Now, Klain used to be the chief of staff for Joe Biden until he was basically kicked out, for lack of a better way to put it. And he ran the debate prep for the Democrats in this case. And I think he is one of the sources for what Bernstein is describing here, because he's describing people who came to Klain and told him different things. So it is interesting that more than likely, and if you go back to some of the weekend reporting where the family was basically attacking various staffers, one of the people who got attacked in that was Ron Klain. And now a day later, you have Bernstein coming out, citing all this knowledge, and some of it looks to have come from Ron Klain. So it appears on some level that perhaps the former chief of staff for Joe Biden is now turning on him. That would be my read of what we're hearing here and one of the sources for this. I'm going to let him keep going here.
That what these folks are saying and have been saying for a while is, yes, he's great when we see him, as we have tonight, but he also has these inexplicable moments that we're very concerned about. And you, Ron Klain, and the First Family, we need to talk about this. And they've been pushed back repeatedly whenever it's been brought up.
And did your sources tell you about topics he's particularly engaged in, or are there?
Not only, and it's not just these same people. There is no question. I have heard for 2 years how sharp Joe Biden is in his national security meetings. He has special briefing books on Ukraine, on the situation in Gaza, that go down into very detailed military reports. He has an absolute command of the facts. He's sharp as can be. You see the evidence of his being the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, of his work as vice president on foreign relations. So we're clearly dealing with two sets of one person. And
that's an interesting phrase too. Two sets of one person, and he's going to go into more what he means here. One of the other reports that came out over the weekend, and that has existed now for the past year and a half, has been that there are these two Bidens, and it's the person you hit between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and the person who exists in any other reference point. And the person who you hit between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. is very engaged and does everything. And if you look at any schedule of White House events, they often schedule most of his events within that time frame. If you get outside of that, that's when things start to go downhill. The fundraiser that Bernstein is referencing from last year, that was a late evening fundraiser that was held. And so you have these moments where Biden is just not there. Now, if you have dealt with this type of situation before, there is a term for this. And as I wrote in one of my columns, this is classically referred to as sundowning, something that we encounter with people with either early stage and sometimes even up to stage 2 Alzheimer's or dementia. That really does appear to be what we're seeing right now with Joe Biden. And it's not extreme to say that there's a medical diagnosis involved here with what Bernstein's going to say next year.
And it really needs to be explored, according to the people I'm talking to. And I think an awful lot of major Democrats believe this, including some who have made statements to the contrary. But this is a problem that's not going to go away unless it's explicable. Does this mean doctors' reports? I mean, obviously, it'd be great if we could have real doctors' reports from both candidates. Well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, Carl Bernstein, stay with us. I want to bring in CNN senior political.
And so from there, they go into a panel where they just talk to other people. And it's interesting. That's not what we really want to cover here. What he's talking about here is, can you explain Joe Biden's actions and what the, quote unquote, two people theory? Can you explain that absent a medical diagnosis? And the answer is no, you really can't. And that's why I've written in my column for the Conservative Institute, I suggested, this is clearly some form of Alzheimer's to me. The version, you're seeing the symptoms of sundowning. And in my view, Congress needs to step in here and ask for these medical records and ask to find out what's happening. Because if the White House can't be run by a person who's just not there all the time, that is critical national security information that Congress needs to know. And we need to investigate that. Now, what's also notable here about what Bernstein is saying is that he's not the only one. So I had thought, watching this for the last few weeks, that it's been really interesting that we hadn't heard from somebody like Carl Bernstein or Bob Woodward. And they've both come out in the last few days and said the same thing, which is this needs to be investigated. And if there's a common knowledge in Washington, D.C. like this, and everybody knows, then this is something that journalists should be investigating. And what Bernstein here has suggested in this interview is that people do know, but very clearly they're not talking out. So that suggests more of a cover-up, or that stories are being spiked. There's a big, everybody made a big deal about Donald Trump and the National Enquirer and how stories related to Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels got spiked. Well, there's a reverse thing happening here. It very much looks like stories related to Joe Biden's health, particularly in some of the mainstream outlets, are likely either being spiked or just not run for one reason or another. And it is notable to me that of the major news organizations, the New York Times editorial board was one of the first to break the dam in calling for Biden to step aside, because they're one of the news outlets that I would suspect to actually know if there is an actual just true diagnosis, if there's medical records somewhere that Joe Biden has dementia, has Alzheimer's, or has some other mental disease that's going on with him here, they're going to know. And having them jump out into the fray first here, that suggests to me that that is a shot across the White House bow, where the New York Times is effectively telling the president, we want you to step aside, and we're offering you this, our editorial here as the easy way. And if the White House continues to buck this trend, I do wonder if you're going to see someplace like the New York Times come out and basically lay it out and say this is what he has, and make it even more difficult for the White House to deny this. And with both Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein both coming out and saying this needs to be investigated, and basically telling young reporters, you guys need to jump in on this and figure out what's happening, that suggests that we're going to see much more. So the press is what this signals to me is that it's full knives out for Joe Biden. He's attempting to sort of ride out the wave here and sort of wait for either the polls or the fervor in the press to die down. And it does not look like that's going to happen, because he gave the speech tonight in an attempt to tap down some of these things. And yet here we are, just a few minutes later, after he goes off the air and walks out of the room, here we have CNN basically dropping a nuke on Joe Biden right after one of his primetime speeches. So this is the sort of thing that you have to monitor, because it signals a significant shift in how the press is going to cover Biden moving forward. Now, they could revert, particularly if it becomes clear that if it becomes clear he's not going to step down, the press could shift back and just say, well, we're going to support him because we do not like Donald Trump. That very well could happen. But for now, you need to approach it as all of the main bodies in the press want Biden out. And so they're going to continue pressing buttons like Carl Bernstein, like Bob Woodward, and like some of these others to try to force the president out. I think what you're seeing right now is sort of a soft pressure campaign. I know it doesn't seem that way when you're bringing out these guys like this, but they're just suggesting and implying something is wrong with Biden. If you really wanted him out, you would go the extra mile and go ahead and just hit him where it really hurts and say that he has something. You would drop the medical record. You would say that he has something that he just flat out couldn't recover from. So this is the sort of thing you got to watch moving forward, because this is what the press wants, and what they want, they're going to continue to push. So this is going to be the narrative from now until likely we get up right until the convention to see whether or not they can force Biden out. And because these types of segments don't come by accident, and you're probably going to see more and more of this over the next coming days and weeks, particularly if the polls start getting worse. And we're going to get into that here, because the polls technically are getting a little worse for Joe Biden. And, I've covered some of this here. My column over here on the CI Digest, if you go to the Conservative Institute, is that Congress should demand Joe Biden's medical records. You can read that there. There's a good roundup in New York Magazine of all the gossip related to Biden's family blame game that they're doing. This is a good roundup here. They just kind of cover all the major storylines that came out of that. But what we're going to focus in on next is the polls out of New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is a very important state because it's in the Northeast, and also it sort of gives us a good idea of how far a Republican is up in the polls, because typically this is a difficult state for Republicans to get competitive in on a national level. You can get governors, senators, and House representatives winning there, but it's difficult to win on the federal level. And if a Republican is doing well nationally in the polls, particularly really well, they're probably going to be showing some signs of getting close in New Hampshire. And that's what we're seeing here. A poll was released this week that showed that Donald Trump is edging out Joe Biden in a New Hampshire post-debate poll. Now, this poll was conducted and just shows a 2-point lead. It was conducted by St. Anselm College and found that 44% of New Hampshire voters would back Trump if the election were held today, compared to 42% for Biden. So 2 points, that's big for conservatives. And it's big for two reasons. One, you'll note here, they say that this is a 12-point swing from an identical poll. And that was when Biden had a 10-point lead. So think about that for, I've documented on this show and in my writing how there's been a collapse in a lot of the polls for Biden's support across the board. This is another one. So he had a double-digit lead in New Hampshire in December, and now Trump has a 2-point lead. This is consistent with Trump having a lead both nationally and having a lead among the swing states. And this is important to note for a few more reasons too. So in 2016, Donald Trump came very close to winning New Hampshire outright. If you look at the 2016 results here, you see that Hillary Clinton came away with 47.6%, and Donald Trump had 47.2%. Very narrow victory for her. That changed in 2020 when you see Joe Biden coming away with a landslide, where he has almost 53% of the vote compared to Donald Trump's 45.5. So you're seeing a shift in these polls here where we're not in a 2020 environment where Biden has his similar advantages. We are likely dealing in an environment where Donald Trump is performing better than how he did in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. And if he's performing better, he very well could win New Hampshire. And so a 2-point lead here is very, very important. The other thing to note here is that the last time that Republicans won in the Granite State here in a general election, I believe was the year 2000. So it has been several decades now since Republicans have pulled out anything here in New Hampshire. There have always been, in every presidential election year, there's usually some polls that show Republicans, kind of close, but in reality, they haven't won it, multiple decades now, and they haven't been close since the year 2016. So if they actually pull it off, that would be a very large thing. And what it signals to everyone is that Donald Trump does truly have a national lead. And if he's got that lead, it's showing up in places like this. And so if this maintains itself moving forward, you're going to see Trump win not only in the major battleground states, you're going to see him pull off some surprise states. And New Hampshire would be one of those surprise states. I know there's been some other polls suggesting that maybe Virginia is possibly a swing state. And if that's true, it signals the same thing. It means that we're looking at a much larger and broader movement on the national polling front. And Trump does have that. So this is not a situation where you can say this is a toss-up race right now, because if it was a toss-up race, it would be very difficult for Trump to be showing and popping these kinds of polls in New Hampshire where he has a lead. So that brings us to the last point here that I want to cover, and that is Joe Biden's internal polls. So one of the things that's happened over the last few days since the debate is Biden has attempted to argue that he should be the only one who represents the Democratic Party come the general election. And one of the ways he's done that is that he's attacked all of his other Democratic allies who also want the job. So you're seeing them drop polls related to Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, Donald Trump versus Gavin Newsom, and just going down the full list and showing that they do no better than he does. And one of the main ways that Biden has to say in the race is to be able to prove that this debate didn't hurt him. And so what we've seen is that his campaign is releasing internal polls showing that President Biden's support is unchanged following the debate. And what they've did is they polled 7 battleground states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And what the president's internal polls, allegedly these internal polls, found is that Trump is leading 46% to Biden's 45%. And they claim that this is virtually identical to its polling in May. Now, this is interesting for a few reasons. The first reason is the closest poll that Biden's internal team can create is that he's losing the battleground states. That should be your first thing. Normally, in an internal poll, if you're trying to use it to sway a media narrative or anything of that nature, it should show your candidate winning. And that means we're looking at a pretty skewed poll here. There's no way that this is going to be an accurate look at what the electorate is, because this is being used to sway people. Olivia Nuzzi reported this, and she said the Biden campaign is releasing information about their internal polling post-debate, which shows Biden losing as a means of arguing that the debate didn't hurt him too much, since he was also losing before the debate. A little bit of a weird thing to do, but what they're effectively trying to say is that, yes, we're losing, but you're losing too, and we're the best ones to carry it forward because we're already here. For me, this is fascinating because I know these are not going to be accurate polls. Some people like to believe that a campaign releases internal polls, that they have some sort of magical view and they have all this insider knowledge that would make them better able to suss out what's happening across these states. And while that may be true, they may have those internal polls. If they're accurate internal polls, they're going to reflect more commonly what we know is happening in the public polling space. And in Biden's case, if he's not reflecting that and he's reflecting something that is better and more rosy for him, then I know right now they're having to do something. They're tinkering with the polls and the demographics of the polls to get to a conclusion that they need. And the way that I can say that is because I can look at the polling averages myself. We can come over here and go to Real Clear Politics, and you can look for yourself. Right now, in the top battleground states, Donald Trump holds a commanding lead in every last single one of them, except for Wisconsin, which shows as a tie. Wisconsin is the one state that's kind of an outlier right now. All the other battlegrounds show Donald Trump leading and leading in convincing fashion. If you average all of them out, he's averaging a 3.3 point lead right now. It's not just 1 point like your Biden's internal polls are showing. It's commanding. And if you look here and you go back, this is the max. We'll bump it down to 6 months here. Trump has had a lead in all of these battleground states for the last 6 months. If you max it out and go back all the way back to 2024, he's had a lead going back into November. So at no point in the entirety of these battleground pollings of Wisconsin has Trump lost any of them. And so right now, it's the same thing. You're looking at all these polls showing the same thing. So if the best skewed polls that Biden's internal polling can show is that he's losing, well, that signals that more than likely or not, the Biden campaign knows they are deep down and they're down badly in all of these states. Some of these are not going to even be competitive. So like North Carolina, Trump is leading by 6.7 points. That's no longer a battleground state. You're talking about not just a lean Republican state, but solidly Republican at this stage. Some of these others are the same way. Arizona is not looking like a battleground state right now. A 5.6 point lead. Even if you had here's why these are big leads, because even if Biden outperforms his polls and has a standard polling error in his favor by around 2 points, 2.5 points, you're looking at results right here that are outside the margin of error. You could knock a lot of these 2 points and Trump would still be leading. And so while Biden would perform better than what the polls are showing, he would still lose. And the scary part, if you're a Democrat, is that Biden has tended to underperform his polls. And if he does the same thing that he did in 2020, where he underperforms by around 2 or 3 points, then you can jack up these results even more, because it means that Trump's going to open up an even larger lead in these states. So it is telling that Biden's internal polls are showing that he's losing. That is the main takeaway. They're trying to use that as an excuse for how they should stay in the race, and Godspeed to them. That works. It works. But if you're trying to do any other kind of analysis here, it's telling you something different. It's telling you that Donald Trump has a commanding lead. And if you look at the general election polls, they're showing the same thing. There's a lot of red here, and Donald Trump's lead in the averages has shot up to 2.2 points. Just 3 or 4 weeks ago, this was down to around half of a point. And the only positive poll right now for Biden is a pre-debate Fox News poll showing Biden leading by 2 points. I know a lot of people have pointed out to me, if they watch Fox News' coverage, they say that it's a close race and that Biden is leading. But that's because they're using their polls. If you look at literally everyone else, it is either a tie race or Trump has a commanding lead. The Harvard-Harris poll is one that came out today. I was looking through it today of registered voters, and it has Trump +4. And this is when the reason it's this low is because they were trying to push the leaners. So they didn't have any. One of the categories they had is they made sure that they didn't have any undecideds. So they said, if you were forced to choose today, who would you choose? And that was a Trump +4. If you allowed the undecideds to exist, Trump's lead shot up to 6 points. If you included third parties like RFK, Cordell West, or Jill Stein, Donald Trump's lead shot up to 6, 7, and 8 points in this poll. This is the Harvard-Harris poll is very alarming, because it is the type of post-debate poll that shows that Biden is deeply behind in this race. And so +4 was the best version of that poll for Biden. The rest of the results in that showed a scary set of results for Joe Biden. In fact, I'm going to see if I can pull up here. One of the more interesting results I found in this was they ran something that I've wanted some of these pollsters to run for a while. So if you look at their approval ratings for the different candidates, Joe Biden's approval rating in this one has dropped to 40%. So that's pretty standard. Joe Biden's approval rating has been between 38 to 41%, depending on the day and time. So this is pretty standard fare. So 40% is his approval rating, his job approval rating. What Harvard Harris did was they ran a question of a Trump approval rating. And one of the reasons this is important is because one of my theories is that this is really an incumbent versus an incumbent race. They're both running on what they did in their first term, and they're asking for a second term. And so while I know why we don't have job approval ratings for Donald Trump, I still feel like we should run them because it probably will tell us something about the race. And Harvard Harris did that. They asked, do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump did as president? So it's past tense, but it's giving us a good idea here because 52% of Americans approve of the job Donald Trump did as president. So a majority of Americans believe he did good. Now that is down from May, which had it at 55%, but still, these are approval ratings above 50%. And in a typical in a typical race, if you have an incumbent running and their approval rating is above 50%, you can basically lock them in for a reelection victory. And one of the ways this ends up proving itself true is that if you, let me track this down here. If you look at, let's see, this is the 6 point, the 8 point. If you're looking at some of the results in this race, here it is. So this is the +4 here on the right. If you had to choose, would you vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden? And this eliminates the undecideds category. So you've got to choose. If you allow undecideds to exist, Trump has a 6 point lead. If you take him out, he has a 4 point lead. And if you notice here, his lead in this Trump +4 is 52%. That 52% matches the quote unquote approval rating. And so this is another thing we would expect. If you were in a race looking at an incumbent's advantage, if the incumbent was nailing their approval rating in the polls, you would say that he would probably match that on election day. So right now, if I knew on election day that Donald Trump had a general approval rating above 50%, specifically 52%, not only would I say he would win, I would expect him to walk away winning the popular vote, which is what we're kind of looking at right now. The way polling is sitting right now, not only am I expecting Donald Trump to win the Electoral College, it is very likely that he walks away with the popular vote as well. This is not a toss-up race. It's not a toss-up even in the slightest. This is a race where Donald Trump is very clearly in the lead. And, we have a lot of time. We haven't even had conventions yet. But if this is where we're headed, where it's an environment where Trump is leading by 2 to 4 points come election day, and he has an approval rating above 50%, I would lock in. You're close to locking in a victory at that point. It is far more likely than not. And that's why you're looking at like Nate Silver's model or the Economist model that have him, Donald Trump with around 70% chance to win, because this is statistically what you would look at. You would look for these types of advantages, and if he's hitting his numbers here, then he's likely going to win. And it would take some kind of external event to shift what you would expect given these underlying fundamentals. So that's where we're sitting in the race right now. You've got the media trying to press Biden out. You've got Biden's internals showing that he's losing and deeply behind. And then you've got Donald Trump winning in places like New Hampshire. These are very large moves, and they're going to come into play as you watch the media cover Biden and see how he is able to navigate these treacherous waters as he's trying to survive as a candidate in this race, because that's what's ahead of Joe Biden right now. He's got to survive. And in the meantime, Donald Trump is just going to coast. He's got everything ahead of him, and all he's got to do is enjoy this and continue trying to expand his lead and bring some of these states online, because the more states that he has at his disposal to win, the easier it is and the more paths he's going to have come election day. That's everything I've got for you today. Hope you have a good rest of your week. God bless, and God bless the United States of America.